Storybook Conversations. Storybook Conversations for Preschoolers with Autism. Presented by Dr. Bonnie Engelin.
Welcome to this presentation on storybooks for preschoolers with autism. My name is Bonnie Engelin. I'm an assistant professor at the University of St. Thomas. And in this presentation, we will talk about some skills that you can use to help students remember and answer questions during storybooks, and then also how you can embed some math instruction within those questions that you ask, and what kinds of math questions are really important for preschoolers to know as they are getting ready for kindergarten. The first strategy we're going to talk about here is a strategy called recall. And this is really an adaptation of what we call dialogic reading strategies, and it involves embedded prompts and supports for students with ASD. It is going to include specific visuals to help the students answer questions with those visuals, as well as a 4-level prompting hierarchy, which I'll describe in more detail in the next couple slides. And the visuals are also really important. Remember that we have students with autism spectrum disorder who struggle with that social communication skills, and they might not always be able to answer our questions or fully understand our questions. And so those visuals really support them in being able to participate in these activities. We also want to make sure we're reading the story 3 times. This really helps the students engage in the stories, get to know the stories and the characters, and better be able to answer our questions fully. If you want more information specifically on recall, please check out some articles by Dr. Whalen. I have 2 here that I've added in the resource file. The first one is called Implementation of Recall, a Systematic Case Study. And the next one is The Impact of Reading to Engage Children with Autism and Language Learning. So these are examples of some of those prompting type questions that you would ask within a story. So these are very similar dialogic reading questions that you would ask with just a few differences thrown in. So the first ones are just those recall type questions. This is where you're going to ask about events and details in the story. So for example, what did Pete put on? What did Cookie knock over? What are they building? The next type of question are more open-ended to try to get the student to talk a little bit more about what they're seeing within the story. So asking this child to explain what's happening on the page. What's happening? I mean, you can see how those kinds of questions can be a little bit harder to add some of those visuals on, but you could have visuals of some of those pictures that are happening, things like that within the story. WH questions. You want to ask the child to identify what a specific object, animal, or item is in the story. So you're going to just basically point to something within the story, and you're going to say, what animal is this? What shape is this? What is he wearing? So it's really kind of those basic kind of identification things. And again, having those picture cues can be really helpful. And they could look just like they do in the story in your pictures, or they could look a little bit different. Again, working on some of those generalizations to some of those specific things. So the next type of question is distancing. So distancing questions are where you're going to ask the child to relate details from the story to their own experiences. Again, really difficult to sometimes maybe get some of those specific pictures to. But for our example question, Pete's at the beach. What do you like to do at the beach? So here you could have pictures of swimming or building a sandcastle or things like that for choices if they're not able to verbally do that on their own. And then the last one is WH inferencing questions. So this is where we really want to make predictions or talk about emotions or emotion identification or other motivations. And so this can be things like, what do you think is going to happen next? That's the best question kind of on the first day when they haven't read the whole story. Or why is the boy throwing away the salsa? Or how do you think Gus feels? And so really just helping them understand some of those basic kinds of questions and things, and making sure we're always providing those visuals and that prompting hierarchy to really support their ability to answer these questions. The prompting hierarchy really starts with that first initial prompt, which is the question you're asking. And again, remember the previous slide really showed examples of some of those questions. And then if the student is unable to respond from just that verbal question you ask, you want to provide 3 visual choices for them so that they can try to use that. Again, we're working with students who have a social communication need, possibly autism, and we really just want to make sure that we're giving them those visual choices. If they're still unable to respond, you might need to recover one of the choices would be the next part of the prompting hierarchy. This provides them with just a binary choice, making it a little easier for them to make a choice. If they're still unable to respond, you want to model how to respond. So you're going to kind of model, show them what the right answer is, and then have the students repeat the response if they are able. A way to build on what we were just talking about, that was recall. This is story grammar intervention, which is really built on the same principles that we learned in recall. But in this case, we're going to still read the story 3 times. We're still going to have that prompting hierarchy with visuals. But really, we also practice retelling the story with visuals and having the students attempting to do it on their own. We also found that during the post-test on the stories, that students still needed those visuals. And so really, if we're going to test their ability to remember things about the story, we really still need to provide those visuals. We also provided visuals as we taught them those elements of the story, such as characters, events, problems, and really taught some of that vocabulary to help them retell the story. And you can check out Dr. Whalen and my article on the effects of adapted story grammar intervention on the listening comprehension of children with autism. And again, that's in the resources. So these are some of the questions that you could ask. And we usually asked, we started with some character questions and talking about who's the main character in the story. And then we went into other questions about characters, like who can eat that spicy salsa? And then we'd ask a question about the setting. Where does the story take place? Again, there's only really one question about the setting because the setting is usually only in one location, but you could ask more if there are more locations within the story. And then we asked 3 event questions, such as what do dragons love? Or what kind of party did the boy have? Or event questions like what do you need to have a dragon taco party? And then we moved into problem questions. So the problem is really, what's going on in the story that the characters are trying to solve? And so with that problem, we could ask questions like just basically, what is a problem? Trying to be more open-ended, trying to get them to give us more of that information. And then another one like, what happened at the boy's house? Again, some more open-ended to get some more information from the students about what happened in the story. And then in the solution, it was the next part. So then how did they solve that problem? Is kind of that first question. Again, kind of open-ended, getting them to try to pull those pieces from the story. And then the last one, the solution question example would be, how could you stay safe in the taco party? So again, trying to bring it into their lives and trying to get them to think about it in a relation to themselves. So the next section, what we really want to talk about is building in math concepts within their storybook reading. And to do this, we really want to start having those conversations and questions about math that we're also asking. And we want to make sure we're focusing on skills beyond just counting. And I have some examples of that on the next slide. You want to make sure that students also, when they are doing counting, that they share their strategies. Remember, we don't always have to start at the beginning and go at the end. Sometimes we go from the end to the other side, or if they're in a circle pattern, did I go this way? Did I go this way? And acknowledging that all of those strategies are successful strategies and that they work. And so talking about that in math, sometimes we can have different strategies and that's okay. You still get the same answer. And then making sure you have visual options for the students to choose from. And I provide some visual options, again, for some basic counting things, but you see at the top, just what number is it? You can see at the bottom, like those strategies. So asking them what their strategy is to count that. And you can see some examples that they could possibly choose for counting strategies. Also, we're going to use that same prompting hierarchy within this to help with this. And then if you're interested in more about this, please check out my article on increasing number sense understanding of preschool students with ASD, and also Dr. Roots and my article on building early number sense of kindergartners with autism. It's a replication study. When we're teaching math to our preschoolers, we really want to focus on a broader set of skills than just counting. And this is called early number sense. And in early childhood, we really look at things such as subitizing, magnitude comparison, one-to-one correspondence, and number conservation. And so subitizing is this where you rapidly or immediately comprehend the magnitude of small numbers. Sounds complicated, but it's really like when you look at a dice and you know there's 3 without counting that there's 3. Our preschoolers need to be able to do that as well. Magnitude discrimination is where you're going to be able to compare 2 groups. That says dots here, but it doesn't have to be dots. It can be anything. And you really want to be able to, without counting, say, oh, this one has more or this one has more. Great snack activity, by the way. One-to-one correspondence. I think most of us know what that is, right? That's where we're going to touch and count items. So that's a great one to do often throughout the day and within the stories. And the last one is numbers conservation. So this is the ability to recognize that a group of items is the same regardless of how they're arranged. And so this could be like maybe there's 4 birds in your story. And as they keep going from page to page, they're in different orders and continuing to count them and realizing whether they're in a line or in a circle or in a triangle shape, there's always the same number of birds. All right, so now we're done with the story. And so now what? It's really important, especially because you're going to read the story multiple times, that you kind of talk about it and address it throughout your day. And you can do this in small group activities that are based on any of the concepts, whether they're math or whether they're acting out the story, all those kinds of things in some of those small group activities, as well as putting then some of those items in free play so students can explore and engage with it further. And also having just discussions throughout your day as you talk about, we're walking down the hallway. And this story, the students are also walking down the hallway, or the pout pout fish went to school just like we're at school. Building some of those connections to the story, to the students' lives as they're going throughout their day. Also, I love math at snack time. Great time to do like magnitude discrimination. Oh, you have more. I have more. Oh, look, I have 3, right? All those kinds of things, even without counting, like focusing on the don't necessarily touch and count, also a good skill. Remember, there's other skills besides just touching and counting. And then also think about adding some engineering activities to the children's day so that they can solve them, such as like maybe they can build a fence to keep the rabbits out, or maybe they can decide that they are going to build a house that the wolf can't knock down, or whatever it is, building those things in so that they can try their own engineering skills.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation with so many wonderful details and things we can do in our classrooms. So my name is Dr. Ann Sam, and I'm an advanced research scientist at Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, and I will be the moderator in today's session. And I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Bonnie England as well. And so I think she's going to pop up on our screen here. I will let her introduce herself to everyone.
Hello, I'm Dr. Bonnie England. And just to describe myself, for those of you who need that, I have kind of light brown hair that comes to my shoulders. I have blue eyes. I'm wearing a red shirt with some flowers on it. I'm sitting in my office at home today while I'm talking with you. And I am just so glad all of you are here. I see in the chat that you like some of the ideas of ways to extend the story. That's great. I would love any questions that you have or things like that I can really just expand upon what you heard.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. And just to remind everyone, you can either type your questions or comments that you might have in the chat, or there's also the Q&A question up at the top as well. So feel free to write a question in there, and I will be monitoring both of those so we can check in about any questions or comments you had. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to start writing their comments now. So while we're waiting for people to type in, I did have a question for you, Dr. England. If you could talk a little bit about, I know one of the challenges when you're trying to think about what visuals might work best when you're using it with a story for students with autism. Could you talk a little bit more about what visuals you might select when you're looking at a particular story? Should it be visuals that are from the storybook? Should it be icons? Should it be something that the child's used to using? So can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and what your suggestions or strategies for teachers would be?
Yeah. And what's interesting about that question is every student is really different, as we know. And some students are really going to be successful most often if they match the story. So if you ask who's the main character and it's a dragon, if the dragon looks like a dragon in the book, they might be more successful. But other times you might really be wanting that student to learn to generalize. So like being able to know it's a dragon, even if it looks a little different. And then you might want to find a different picture of a dragon to see if they could still be able to answer that question correctly with the dragon looking a little bit different than it does in the story. I know maybe some of us, maybe a lot of us have used like Boardmaker where they're more simplistic, easy pictures. And I'm not here to promote Boardmaker or anything, but they are sometimes some students need that more stick figure-ish or simplistic picture as well. So just anytime you're using a picture, maybe trying to simplify it, not as much background stuff or extra pieces, so that they really can just focus on the main piece of whatever the picture is you're using.
Yeah, those are some great strategies, because I know a lot of times our kiddos with autism have a really hard time with that generalization piece. So what you were talking about of, maybe you start with one picture, but then you're showing, hey, there's different dragons and dragons can look different ways, is really great example of how you can increase that generalization for students. We have one question that is about all the articles that you mentioned. How would participants be able to access those articles?
So I was told they were added to the session and the resource piece. So I think they should be there. I'm maybe not the best person to answer that question because I'm not the tech. Do you know the answer to that, Anne?
Yeah, so any materials that were sent in, we should be able to have access to them via the STEMI, the platform for the conference, and we'll be posting those materials as well. If you are having trouble finding where those might be, please go ahead and send us a question or chat with us, and someone from our team will go ahead and find those for you as well. But that's a great question, and I'm sorry, did you have another comment, Bonnie?
No, I was just going to say you can also email me. It looks like someone said they found them and downloaded them in the chat, so that's great. If you're not seeing them or it's not working, I think my email is also there. Please just send me an email and I'd be more than happy to send you the articles.
Okay, great. Yeah, it looks like there might be some confusion because it might be at when you go to the session, you have to scroll down to actually find the article. So keep scrolling, and then I think that they should be there. Thank you, everyone. Another question is about the connections to life that you mentioned when you were going through for the stories. What are some of the ways that you can make those connections? Should they be immediate connections of we read a story and we're going to talk about something that happens, immediately afterwards, maybe within the school day, or can they be home connections?
Yeah, I think both is really a great idea. Sometimes our students need that immediate connection. So like we just read it and now we need to do something about it to help us make those connections. But then it's also really great to talk about the home, bring in, there's the book about dragons and spicy tacos and some of the questions were about. And so you can talk about, does your family eat tacos? Do you like spicy food? Do you not eat spicy food? Maybe you could have tacos right after so they have that immediate kind of connection. But then also talk about what is it like at home? May your mom like tacos? Does your dad? Does your grandpa? Whoever it is that you have in your life, those adults in the children's lives that might, have those connections with the story. And I think that's it's a really important question to say yep, we need those real life examples. We need them immediately because some students I just read it. I need to make a connection right now. And then having the immediate connection can also then help support them make other connections that happen later in their lives.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Can you also share a little bit more, Bonnie, about the hierarchy of prompts?
Yeah. So the prompting hierarchy, it's what we call a least to most prompts. And so it's really with the assumption that we hope our goal is, at least eventually, that they'll answer the first question that we ask without any added support. But if they're unable to do that, then that's when we move to the next step of the prompting hierarchy. We're going to pull out those visuals. And I always suggest 3 visuals. You can, change that up, whatever works best for your students. But 3 is usually a good amount to have choices, but not too many to be too distracting. And so you show those 3 choices and you ask the question again. And then you allow them to pick one of the pictures. And now you can have them so that they can't move the pictures, or they could be Velcro. It really just depends on what works best for you. I like to have them separate pictures and Velcro so the student could take it off and show it to me, or put it on another board to show it the answer. And the other reason that Velcro is helpful is the next one. So if they're unable to answer with those 3 choices, then you take away one of the wrong answers. You go, oh, no, okay. And then ask the question again when they only have 2 choices. So let's say it's those dragons again, and our dragons are the main character. And that's what we're asking about, is who is the main character. Maybe you have a picture of the dragon, a dog, and a buffalo. And so then in the next one, we take away the buffalo because that's not the right answer. And we ask the question again, who's the main character? And then they could choose between the dog and the dragon. And then if they don't answer again, we remove the dog. And then we help them reach towards the dragon and say, the dragon's the main character. Or depending on the verbal skills of the student, maybe just say, dragon. And then we want the student to repeat what we say so that they know that that is the correct answer. And not all of our students are all that verbal, so they might not even be able to repeat the word dragon. And if that's the case, you probably want them to take the dragon off and put it on another board that shows that this is the answer. So that way they're like really practicing that process of I'm using this picture to answer the specific question.
You know, I think that that's such a great process that you just described, the least to most prompting in this systematic way, because you're able to build in independence for the students. So they're able to, at each step, able to have a correct answer with the least amount of assistance from an adult, while you're also simultaneously ensuring that they're going to have success at the end of this experience and always have the right answer. So I think that that's a really amazing way to prompt students to ensure success moving forward. Similar to this question around, that is similar to the prompts and the visual cues. The visual cues is such a wonderful focus, but do you have other adaptations that you found to be useful during storybook conversations with students?
And, you know, so there's lots of different ways to adapt stories that I've done. There are some amazing books that have too much language in them, just too many words. And so sometimes I've adapted the language in the books, just simplified it. So it's a little bit, it can hold their attention better because it's not as long. It's a little more simplistic, but yet they're still enjoying the same rich, deep story that maybe their peers also read that day or something like that. So they really can get that connection. Other ways that I've adapted it is sometimes like putting actual like Velcro pieces or things in the story so that they can like put their own piece in, they can like interact and engage with the book. You just really want to find ways to make that storybook interesting, engaging for them. You want to choose books that aren't too long, books that are right at their developmental level to be able to sit and listen to. And maybe they can get up and jump or something or do something that characters are doing. I mean, just all those kind of adaptations as far as like engagement are really, really important. And so I always try to think of like those universal design principles. So starting with like representation, how am I representing the book that I might be able to change? Can I sing it? Can I use a silly voice? Can I do those things? And then thinking about how can the students' action and expression be different? So how are they gonna do something different with the story? How can they, if they have, can they have a picture they can put in? Do they have the manipulatives with the story? A good one is like that story about the mitten and all the animals crawl on the mitten. So if they all had an animal that they could put in a mitten that I had, right, to be part of the story as it's happening. Those are good kind of action and expression things for students. And then also always thinking about engagement. Can they jump? Can they move? What can I do to really help engage them? And also thinking about the child. I want them to start answering questions about a story, but they hate dragons, but they love ladybugs. Guess what? Let's read about ladybugs, right? So just thinking about all those principles as we're working through those adaptations, I think is really key.
Yeah, those ideas of interactivity as well as using interests that we know this student really likes really builds together to increase that engagement overall. So you, in your presentation, you mentioned some of the connection between culture, background, interest, and home. Do you have any tips for how we can effectively build relationships to do this well?
Yeah, it's really, really important that we work with families, right? Those connections with families and everything our students know, everything we know is all based on our culture, how we grew up, our connections, and making those connections are really key. And I am really about culturally sustaining practices as opposed to responsive. I mean, being responsive is good, but I want to be proactive. I want to be sustaining. I want to already have those things in mind. And really the best way to do that is to get to know the family, research the families, research their backgrounds. And just because you research a specific culture doesn't mean that's going to fit each family in your classroom, because every family is still different. And so asking the child, now again, the child may not have a lot of language, and so you might need to ask another sibling, or you might need to be able to talk to the family. Try to have those times. I know a lot of people who are in early intervention sometimes get to go into the homes, and that's a great way to like build that time together to really like learn about their culture, spend that time to get to know them. And that's really going to help. And like if you're doing any coaching practices in the home to help support the families as well.
Yeah, those are some really amazing tips for early intervention as well. So one of the other things you mentioned was this extensions that you could do around engineering. Do you have any specific examples around how you might incorporate that with a specific story that you've done in the past?
Yeah. So I love this idea. It's something I really want to do a research study on, is how do we build in these engineering activities with our storybooks? So do you know the story? Is it Mr. McGregor and the rabbits keep trying to get in? I can't remember what the name of that story is off time. But it's a great story where he keeps changing his fence. He builds this fence and the bunnies get in. He builds another fence and the bunnies get in. And he keeps building and building and they always get in. And in the end, they share the carrots together. And then have the kids later, well, what kind of fence would you build? And have them use different materials, have blocks out, have popsicle sticks, have all those kinds of just different materials that they could try to use to build a fence. But even before you have them build, you want them to draw, possibly, if they could. Make a design like an engineer would, start designing, thinking. And if they can't draw it, maybe they could talk about it, or maybe they could whatever. And some might just need to get right in and start trying to build. But it's a great way to kind of build from there. You could also do things like building a house. When you read like the story of the pigs and the wolves blowing down their houses, right? The big bad wolf. Thinking about building better houses and how they could do that. Just thinking about engineering always starts with, what is the problem? So like we talked about even in our stories, that's one of the questions we ask. What's the problem in this story? And then ask the kids to engineer a solution. And so even just thinking about the spicy tacos, what happens is the drains burn down the house every time they eat spicy tacos because it's too hot. Well, what could you do to that house to make it so it wouldn't burn as easy? Like, how could you change the house? What kinds of things could they add? And just providing enough materials and supplies for the students to like make their own version of that.
Yeah, these are such great ideas for extensions of how you can read a story, it be connected to the math, and then do an extension on engineering as well. So one of the things that I was thinking about, Bonnie, do you have strategies? Because sometimes I know, even back when I was a teacher, I would get really excited about going and hearing all these wonderful things. And then I would get back to my classroom and I would think, oh no, what's the first thing I should do? And how should I start? And how should I start incorporating this into my classroom and my practice with families and the work that I'm doing? So I wonder if you have any strategies of how you would suggest for teachers and practitioners to begin using some of the things you talked about in their own classrooms and settings.
Yeah. My first suggestion would be to not wait, right? To try to do it as soon as you're done here, because what happens is you're all excited, you get back to work and you start just getting into the routine of work. And sometimes then you forget to add in these pieces or bring it in. And then also start small. Don't think I'm going to change my entire curriculum. I'm adding all of these pieces in. We're doing it now. Pick one book. Pick a book that when you heard me talking about that, you're like, oh, I love this book. And it was perfect for that. So find that book, find that thing, and make those adaptations to that one story, and then slowly add in others as that seems to really be connecting and working for you.
Yeah, I think those are some really amazing tips to start small, because I do think that you're like, I want to do it all. I want to do everything possible that I can. And it's so hard to get that up in your classroom and then sustain that over time. So I love the picking something that you really love or something that your students love and building off from there. So I'm going to open it back up and see if there's any more questions or any more comments for Bonnie. I'm not seeing any more coming in, but let's give a couple more seconds just to see if anything else there's any other questions or comments.
Yeah, I see that comment about that it's good to start small. Just as we're waiting, it is like if we go home and think we're going to change everything, sometimes we end up changing nothing because it is just too much. So absolutely start small.
Yeah. So many great points. I'm excited to see what people might do after your talk today, Bonnie, because you had so many really concrete things that we can do immediately when we go back to classrooms and our work with families. So if there's no more questions, which I'm not seeing anymore, I think the next we're going to be showing a maker video, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think that will start in just a minute. But I want to thank you, Bonnie, again so much for all your wonderful ideas and suggestions, and also the additional information that you shared with us during the question and answer period as well. So thank you so much. Oh, wait, there might be one more. I just saw it pop up. Okay, yes. We had one other question, about culturally sustaining practices and about specifically selecting storybooks with this in mind.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about making sure that you're really finding those stories that speak to the culture of the students that are in your classroom. I know what I would do is if you are working in a district, or even if you're not, go to the library, talk to the librarian. I love librarians. They know so many more books and stories than I know. And it's a great way to get an idea of, hey, I need a story about this, or a story that has some more representation of a different culture that we're just missing. The librarian usually can be really, really helpful in helping find those specific things. Because like I said, I mean, every group is going to have different cultures in them. Wherever you're working, the cultural makeup is going to be different. And so go to the library, go to those places, and find that. And if you know someone, ask them too. They might have like stories that they're aware of that are really meaningful and really important specifically to their culture. And that would be so great to bring that in. Think of the engagement those students would have if it's a story that just is really meaningful and important to their family that you could bring in and read. And I hope that answers that fully. But like sometimes I think we need to use those other resources outside of ourselves, because I don't always know everything that's out there. And so finding someone else to help support that, I think, is sometimes the best solution.
Yeah, that's some great ideas of asking for support for people that you think can provide support, such as librarians, but then also that critical piece of starting that conversation with families and with students as well, to bring their expertise into the classroom and get their opinions about what's important to them, and starting those conversations by asking. Okay, are there any additional questions? Wait another couple seconds. But I really have appreciated everything that you've talked about today, Bonnie, and all the wonderful concrete examples of how can we start small and build this within our classrooms? How can we use visuals to increase the understanding for students with autism, and also increase engagement when they're doing these activities? So many wonderful tips and strategies that we can begin using. Yep. So we want to thank you again, Bonnie, for everything. And we will be moving now to our maker video.
Well, thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you.